If you're a guitar player, or even just someone who appreciates music, you're familiar with Fender guitars. Fender has been a part of the backbone of rock and roll and its various offshoots for decades. Fender got started in the 1930s as a repair shop for radios, amplifiers, and other electronics. The first instruments Fender produced were actually lap steel guitars, in partnership with Doc Kaufman, who gets credit for inventing the original vibrato mechanisms in the mid-1940s. Around the same time, Leo Fender began tinkering around with the idea for what we now know as the Telecaster, first released as the Broadcaster. We'll get more into Teles later, though. Fender brought tons of innovation to the guitar market, and models such as the Stratocaster, Precision Bass, and Jazzmaster have been played in recording studios and on stages across the globe for decades. And through these decades, Fender has released a lot of guitars. Some of them have grabbed a hold of the music world and made a foothold for themselves, while others have fallen into relative obscurity. In this video, I want to take a deep dive into the Fender guitar and bass guitar lineup, past and present. I decided to go for the Iceberg format for the algorithm, because it kind of makes sense to organize Fender guitars by obscurity. Now, before we get started, I need to add some metaphorical asterisks. Not everyone is going to agree with the placement of every guitar on this list. But it's my video, so I'm doing what I want, operating purely on vibes. Second, I'm purposefully leaving things out, such as the CBS history or skipping over other things. I'm sticking only to Fender and Squier models. Squier, if you don't know, being the budget-conscious subsidiary brand. Honorary shout-out to Hartfields, made by Fender in the Ibanez factory just for crossover appeal. If I went into Jacksons, Charvels, and EVH guitars, this video would be hours long, so we're just not going there. Also, I'm not going to go through every possible permutation of Stratocaster and Telecaster in this video. Nocaster, Broadcaster, Esquire, Cabernita, they're Teles. They're all Teles. I'm sticking to things that are different enough to merit their own category. So without further ado, let's buckle in and weaponize my autistic special interest in music gear to get this list rolling. Level 1. Even your grandma knows these. Okay, so your Mimi may not be able to name a Strat on sight, but she's certainly seen one before. This tier is for the stuff that I guarantee every guitar player recognizes and quite a few non-guitar players also know. First up, the Stratocaster, the guitar that launched a million variations and copycats. Strats began life in 1954, and while you can still get the classic Strat configuration today, there have been quite a few changes and variations to the body, neck profile, headstock, pickups, and bridge design over the years. The prototypical Strat has body and arm contours, 3 single-coil pickups, and a floating vibrato system at the bridge. You can get Strats with humbuckers, Strats with Floyd Roses, the annoyingly rare hardtail Strat, alternate reality jazz Strats, the list goes on. But the overall shape of the Strat is ubiquitous. Strats are known for being really comfortable and ergonomic to play, thanks to the contoured body. Even super Strats, such as the Fender Heavy Metal or vintage Squier Stagemaster, not to mention the countless Charvels, Jacksons, LTD Schecters, and Ibanez RGs, still follow this same basic body shape. A huge chunk of modern metal guitars are descended from the Strat shape. Brief shout out to 2 lesser-known Strat-style guitars in the Fender family, the Stratasonic and the Strat Baritone Subsonic. The Stratasonic has popped up both in the Fender and Squier lines and features 2 P90s, a hardtail bridge, and a Gibson scale. The Subsonic is actually exceedingly rare in its original Fender form and was released in the year 2000. Examples usually go for around $2,000. If you're interested in a baritone Strat today, Fender sells conversion necks under the same Subsonic name. Next, the Telecaster. I'd argue that this is tied with the Strat for popularity, although it seems to have more of a foothold in the country music scene than Strats do. Teles were the first mass-produced electric guitars in the world, showcasing Leo Fender's revolutionary modular, bolt-on design ethos. Teles are mainly known for their slab bodies and hardtail, ashtray-looking bridge. Typical Teles have 2 single-coil pickups, although you can absolutely find many permutations. They're very utilitarian and simple guitars, which has made them a popular choice for people in many genres of music. Other common Tele variations are semi-hollow bodies, Bigsby tremolos, and sometimes a forearm contour or belly cut, which usually elicits a lot of argument online as to whether it's still a real Tele at that point. There's also the offset Tele, which is just a Tele in a Jazzmaster code. The Precision Bass was arguably just as much of a revolutionary concept as the original Broadcaster. Prior to the P-Bass, bassists schlepped around huge, expensive upright basses to every gig. The P-Bass, released in 1951, was designed to fix this inconvenience and also allow for easier amplification in larger bands. This instrument ended up being the defining cornerstone of modern music, and after the shock wore off, gained large acceptance among session players, especially in the Motown scene. P-basses originally looked more like Telecasters, and you can still find Tele-style P-basses today, but once the Strat came onto the scene, Leo Fender retooled the aesthetics to be more in line with that. P-basses are defined by their non-offset body and split coil pickups. As with the Strat and Tele, there are variations on the P-bass, including different scale lengths, additional pickups, 5-string variations, and even occasionally a fretless 5-string model that caused an arm and a leg. I'm not irritated by that at all. Rounding out our first Iceberg level, we have the jazz bass. This was released in 1960 to appeal to jazz players with its slimmer neck and brighter, more mid-range focused pickups. It took design cues from the Jazzmaster with an offset body. Much like the precision bass, the jazz bass has gained widespread acceptance among musicians, and the debate rages on as to whether the P or the J is better. It's the P bass, and I'll die on this hill. Jazz basses also come in several variations, including 5 strings, pickup variations, and are much more common to find fretless models in, thanks to Jocko. Level 2. You can get it at Guitar Center. So this tier is for the stuff that most guitar players are going to know, and it's pretty easy to find a lot of variations and models across the Fender and Squier ranges. They're just not as quite as ubiquitous or influential as the stuff in Level 1. First is the Jazzmaster. I debated whether or not the Jazzmaster belonged in this level or the first one, but ultimately decided to put it here. Jazzies were originally released in 1958 and were designed to appeal to jazz guitarists. The jazz guitarists didn't like them, but surf rockers sure did, and they had a brief golden age during the 1960s. Its popularity fell off a lot in the 1970s, leading to a complete discontinuation in 1980, and it was actually really hard to get a hold of one until the aughties when they started to have a resurgence in popularity again. I'm still mad someone in high school's rich dad bought him the Purple Sparkle J Mascus, and he didn't even play, and he sold it for beer money. Anyways, these guitars were so unpopular at one point that they could be had for really cheap from pawn shops, which is why bands such as Sonic Youth, My Bloody Valentine, and Dinosaur Jr. snatched them up, leading to their rise in desirability again. Jazzmasters are defined by their large offset body, 2 large soap bar style single coil pickups, the rhythm circuit on the top bout, and the unique vibrato system. Today, most Jazzmasters stick to this design, although there have been a few variations such as humbucker models, hardtails, and retooled controls since its reintroduction. Next up is the Jazzmaster's younger and smaller brother, the Jaguar. Released in 1962, the Jaguar found itself following the same path as the Jazzmaster, with the model discontinued in 1975 and revived in 1999. It follows the same design cues as the Jazzmaster with a near-identical body and the same vibrato system. The biggest departure from the rest of the Fender lineup so far is that the Jaguar features a short 24-inch scale as opposed to the typical Fender 25.5-inch scale. It has similar pickups to a Stratocaster, but they're housed in a metal claw shielding, cutting down on noise. The switching system is pretty unique, and we'll actually see more of this one later. So 2 of the switches turn the pickups on and off, and then the third is a strangle switch, which is basically a filter. It also features a rhythm circuit similar to the Jazzmaster. Again, there are quite a few variations on Jaguars in the market today, mainly with different pickup configurations. More rarish Jaguars include the homoerotically named Bottom Master, which is more or less a Jaguar-style take on the Bass 6. At a slightly shorter 28.5-inch scale and hardtail, this is a pretty unique Fender offering, especially in the baritone space. There are also baritone specials at a 27-inch scale and humbucker pickups, and the Baritone Jaguar Custom, which is similar to the Bottom Master but was also branded as the Jaguar Bass 6. I gotta mention the Jaguar bass here as well, since we're on the topic. It has the same body shape as the guitar version, and has come in several permutations of pickups, as well as a short scale version. So these started in the mid-2000s, so they're really not a model with a ton of history compared to everything else we've covered so far. And since I don't want to have a whole other section later in this video, there's also the more obscure reverse Jaguar bass, released as part of the Pawn Shop series and featuring humbucker pickups and an almost Thunderbird-looking pickguard. There's also the Jagmaster, originally released by Squier as part of the Vista series in 1996, and it's seen a few revivals since then. However, it's pretty much what it says on the tin, a Jaguar body with simpler controls and usually 2 humbuckers. This model has more or less been split between the Jazzmaster and Jaguar HH models over the years. So I want to roll all 4 of these next guitars into one section since they're all so similar, but there's enough differences to at least point them out. Mustangs, Music Masters, Broncos, and Duosonics. The Music Master and Duosonic were both released in 1956, intended as student models, and they originally had 22.5-inch scales and hardtail bridges. The Music Master had 1 single coil neck pickup, and the Duosonic had 2. The Mustang came a little later in 1964. It had a slightly larger, more offset body, 2 single coil pickups, and a vibrato system. The Music Master and Duosonic were consequently retooled to use the Mustang body, and all three models were offered in 22.5 or 24-inch scale. The Bronco followed in 1967 and featured one bridge pickup with a unique vibrato system. Much like their other offset brethren, the Mustang Sonicos were discontinued in the early 1980s, and they had a revival moment with Mustangs in the 1990s, largely thanks to... Now, Duosonics and Mustangs are widely available, with the differences largely lying with the Mustang keeping its vibrato bridge and added controls. The Music Master has not had as much luck, although this really cool floral Shawn Mendes version was released in 2020, and I will be forever kicking myself for not buying one for a reasonable price when I had the chance. Yes, there are also Mustang and Music Master basses, including a Squier Vista Music Master made in the late 90s. You can still get Mustang basses today from both Squier and Fender at several price points. Bronco has been recently revived as a very cheap and very moddable Squier bass model as well, but the original guitar trim system is lost to history. Maybe Music Masters will make a comeback soon, although there really isn't enough difference between the Duosonics and the Mustangs to justify another model, and most people don't want just a net pickup anyways. Level 3. Gear nerds in local indie rock bands love these. This is going to be my most contentious level. Quite a few of the guitars in this level have had a resurgence in the past few years, thanks to Squier bringing them back to test the market for more expensive Fender ones probably coming out soon. A lot of the paranormal and alternate reality models fall into this category. However, there are a couple of older guitars in here that I would argue are due for a reissue. Most of the guitars at this level are not popular enough to warrant lots of variations in hardware or electronics, but they're fairly easy to obtain. So I wouldn't exactly call this category obscure, but I certainly had to do a bit of brain sweeping to remember some of these when I was making this list. The Starcaster, Fender's attempt at a semi-hollow 335 style guitar. Well, one of them. We'll talk more later. This guitar was originally only made for 6 years, from 1976 until 1982. Don't confuse it with these Starcasters, these are garbage. It features the Fender scale, 25.5 inches, making it a cool alternative if you don't like the Gibson scale. They have a neat headstock design with the painted curve, dual humbuckers, and an offset body. The F-holes are also offset from each other. Original 70s models have a Strat-esque hardtail bridge, but newer models have a stop tail and tom style. The vintage Starcasters are not well regarded, as they were made in a pretty crappy era of Fender quality control. Fender reissued these under the Modern Player series back in the 2010s, and Squier followed suit a few years ago with both Affinity and Classic 5 models. And of course, more recently, the Tom DeLonge signature version, which seems to have made a lot of people really upset. Probably because it's $1,200 for an Indonesian Squier with a Fender logo on the headstock, but yeah, I digress. The Powercaster. This one's pretty recent, but honestly hasn't seemed to make many waves. Released in 2019 as part of the Alternate Reality series, the Powercaster is somewhere between a Jazzmaster and Fender's subsidiary Charvel's Skatecaster. A Gibson scale length, hardtail bridge, and humbucker P90 pickup combo make this a pretty different offering from Fender, but these really have not seemed to do all that well. I wonder if there will be an updated version of this in the future in, say, the Player 2 series or in the Squier Paranormal line. The Bass 6. These have had a huge explosion in popularity in the past few years thanks to Squier re-releasing them, first in the vintage modified line and now in the classic vibe. And as of very recently, Fender offers them in the Mexican Ventera 2 line. These are definitely one of the more unique Fender instruments, but they've had cycles of obscurity and relevance over the years. Most famously played by Robert Smith of The Cure and Brian Molko of Placebo, these are the unholy love child of a bass and a Jazzmaster. Some people call it a baritone, and I guess. It's a 30-inch scale, they have 6 strings, spaced similarly to a guitar, but are a full octave down from normal guitar tuning. The body's offset, but slightly different from the Jazzmaster Jaguar, with a more curved upper bout. It shares pickup controls in type with the Jaguar and has the same vibrato system. The control system and pickups actually predate the Jaguar by 1 year in 1961 and was incorporated into the Jaguar design. They've had various revivals and reissues throughout the years and have been consistently offered since 2013. The pawnshop variation has a Jazzmaster bridge pickup. I already mentioned once before, and we're back with another Cobain special. Personally, I prefer the E270 out of all of his guitars because I'm an Unwound fan, but that's not a signature model or a Fender, so... Anyways, here we have the unholy abomination that is the Jag-Stang. It's kind of what it says on the tin. It's a baby between a Jaguar and a Mustang. Allegedly, Kurt took Polaroids of both guitars, cut them in half, and taped them together and showed it to Fender. He didn't really play his signature very much, but it certainly has had enough demand to have 2 reissues. It has a humbucker in the bridge and a Strat-style single coil up top, the Mustang-style controls, and a vibrato system, as well as the 24-inch scale. Originally released from 1996 to 2001, it was reissued by Fender Japan for a couple of years starting in 2003, and then in 2021 was given another reissue for the 30th anniversary of... We'll see in my opinion, much better take on this Jaguar Mustang guitar concept in the next level of the Iceberg. The Rascal bass is a relative of the Bass 6, but it's a proper 4-string bass. It has the same body shape and a 30-inch scale, along with a fairly unique headstock it shares with the next guitar on our list. It has lipstick pickups and a unique bridge design that allegedly makes it brighter and easier to intonate than most other short-scale basses. This was originally a one-off weirdo model in the mid-2010s, but Squier recently released a paranormal version. You gotta love these things, they're just weird enough to be unique without being too outlandish. Next up is the Coronado. I debated putting this in the next tier, but it got a modern player reissue a few years back in 2013, and had quite a few variations over its run. I'd not be surprised if this was in the pipeline for Squier or Fender to do another reissue. This is another semi-hollow Fender design, originally released in 1966, and it ran for 5 years. It's got a funky, skinny/bulbous headstock shape, symmetrical body and F-holes, unlike the offset Starcaster, Diamond-style Filtertrons, more on Diamond later, and it was meant to compete with the ES330. There's a surprisingly wide array of variations on the Coronado for something that really isn't a staple of the Fender lineup. The Coronado 1 and 2 denote the number of pickups specifically, a 12-string model, and the Wildwood color variants, which features some pretty wild wood. Allegedly, they injected dye into living trees that were then used to make the bodies. There's also 2 bass variations, with the model numbers corresponding again to the number of pickups. The Fender Lead series was originally very short-lived and had a very weird time in guitar history, 1979 to 1982. These guitars seem like they want to be shredders, but can't quite let go of the vintage Fender stylings. This leads to a pretty interesting-looking instrument. The body is Strat-esque, albeit a little bit smaller than a Strat, and the horns are nearly symmetrical. They also have a Strat-style headstock and hardtail bridge. The original leads have 1 single bridge humbucker. Reissues that began in 2020 have either 2 single coils, the lead 2, or 2 humbuckers, the lead 3. Other than that, the typical Fender 9.5 radius and 25.5-inch scale lengths apply. However, they are something a little different, and the reissue colors are super cool, and I wish Fender would do them on other models. Meteoras are one of the newest and most radical Fender designs out there. Originally released as part of the Parallel Universe series, the original 2018 Meteora featured a Tele-style bridge and pickups and the unique body shape, but was ultimately just a Tele in a mid-century modern costume. However, they were slightly redesigned for the alternate reality series shortly after, with a string-through body and a tom bridge and 2 humbuckers. Most recently, the Meteora has made its way into the Player 1 series and features a Strat-style bridge. There's also a Meteora base model with 2 soap bar humbucker pickups. While the body at first glance looks pretty big, it's actually smaller than a Jazzmaster, while still firmly living in the Fender offset family. I know this isn't obscure as they're widely available right now, but they definitely are a departure from the usual and, in my opinion, earn their place here in the middle of the iceberg. Time will tell if they stick around long enough to become regulars, say in the Player 2 series, or if they're just an experiment like many of the other guitars in this tier. And now, for another weirdo and one of my favorite underdogs, the Toronado. No, it's not Tornado. These originally came out in 1998 as Made in Mexico models and ran until 2006. I don't count ending in 2003 and starting a new version in 2004 as a reissue. The most notable thing about the Toronado, besides its shape, is the 24.75-inch scale, like a Gibson. There are only a few Fender models with this scale. The first round of Tornados featured a fuller body pickguard, while the 2004 to 2006 versions had more of a half guard and a tom bridge and a stop tail. There's also the GT version from this era, which has no pickguard and racing stripes, and 2 US Fender models, the Special and the Highway 1, both with the same half pickguard style as the later Mexican versions. Squier has reissued the Toronado recently as part of the Paranormal line that follows the aesthetics of the original release. Speaking of Gibson scale Fenders, check out the TC90. This is, in my opinion, one of the coolest Fender models out there. Sure, it's basically a Tele on the surface, but with a double-cut, semi-hollow body. It's also got a tom bridge and 2 P90 pickups, and as mentioned, the Gibson scale. This was originally run from 2004 to 2007, and then adopted by Jim Adkins of Jimmy Eat World as his signature guitar, JA90, but sadly losing the double-cut look for the traditional Tele shape. Bring back the double-cut, of which, I should mention, there is another limited American standard Tele model of in non-semi-hollow form. And following that, we have yet another Gibson scale Fender, the Cyclone, which I deem different enough from the rest of the Mustang family to warrant its inclusion in this level. Produced from 1997 to 2006 originally, there are two main versions of the cyclone, creatively named 1 and 2. All versions have a Strat-style vibrato bridge. The original run was solid colors and had a humbucker bridge with a Strat neck pickup. The Cyclone 2 is arguably the much cooler version and features 3 Jaguar pickups, plus the switching system and a racing stripe. The Cyclone HH is the same as the original Cyclone 1, but with 2 humbuckers, and there's also a US version that came out of the custom shop for a brief period of time. Squier re-released the Cyclone 2 as part of the Paranormal series without the rad racing stripe and with normal Strat pickups back in 2020, and I'm honestly not sure if they're discontinued or not right now. There's also a limited made-in-Japan Cyclone model available right now that came out back in May. These have a humbucker bridge and a single coil neck. Now I want to talk about the Pawn Shop series that I haven't yet mentioned. I'm reluctant to roll all of these into one, but bear with me here. A couple of them are unique enough to merit their own section, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a Squier version at some point. So the Offset Special is a weird hybrid between a Strat and a Jazzmaster, with a semi-hollow body shaped like a fat offset Strat, no pickguard, Jazzmaster tremolo, and P90 pickups. The other fairly unique guitars in the pawn shop are the 51 and 72, which are a weird hybrid of Tele aesthetics and Strat bodies. The 51 was actually originally produced by Squier, making it the rare case of a Fender guitar copying a Squier, instead of the other way around. The 51's a solid body with a hardtail bridge, humbucker bridge pickup, and a single coil Strat pickup in the neck. The 72 is a semi-hollow dual humbucker version. Finally, we have the Jaguarillo, I have no idea how to pronounce this, and Mustang Specials. I don't really feel the need to say much about these, as they are basically just different pickup variations on the original models. The Mustang is hardtail though, to its credit. I and many others would love to see the Offset Special, maybe with a more unique model name, added to the Squier lineup, as it's a pretty cool guitar. There's one more pawn shop guitar, but I feel like it warrants its own space, as it's recently been reissued by Squier and is not based on an existing body style. The Supersonic, not to be confused with the Fender amp of the same name. This is a weird reverse offset model, somewhat resembling a Jazzmaster, but not quite, that originally started off as a Squier exclusive Japanese-made Vista line model in 1996. More on these later. It was also released as a pawn shop special model in 2011 by Fender, features a Strat-style bridge and 2 funkily placed zebra humbuckers. Level 4. You might get lucky. This level is a mismatch of the short-lived and mostly forgotten Dark Age models, as well as cult classic Fenders or Squiers that are not exactly unobtainium, but are either pretty expensive or don't pop up for sale very often. We'll follow up on the end of the last level with another Squier Vista series model, the Venus. So this has the distinction of being one of the first signature guitars for a female guitarist. Depending on your opinion, it's unfortunately the signature of, well, she was married to... These were made in Japan in the Fujijin plant and sold for $700 back in the day. They tend to go for pretty high prices nowadays, although deals can still be found occasionally from someone who doesn't know what they have. These were only made for 1 year, from 1997 to 1998. Everything about this guitar is awkward in the body, but I can't help but kind of love it. I'd love to have one of these, and I keep my eyes peeled for a deal. These have not been reissued yet, and I don't know if they ever will, given Courtney's kind of controversial status. Another weirdo Squier signature model that has a huge cult following is the Musuar. This is, I think, what people really want the Jagstang to be. This is the signature guitar of Ryan Jarman of the Cribs, and it was a special run. That means there were no variants, not even in color, unless you're Jarman himself, who has a few colors. There are less than 200 of these out in the wild. The body is a mashup of the Jaguar and the Mustang, but the good parts. And it has the Jag trim with the tom bridge, humbucker bridge pickup, and Jaguar neck pickup, rounded off with a beautiful burgundy mist finish with matching headstock, and you have the offset that all the jingle jangle nerds go crazy for, including myself. The outcry for a wider availability for these at non-astronomical prices has been so loud that even Jarman himself has tweeted asking Fender to reissue it. Fingers crossed. The Jarman signature bass. Released along with his brother's signature model, Gary Jarman's signature Squier bass is another offset weirdo. Somewhat related to the Bass 5 design, more on that later. With an old-school precision headstock, this medium-scale 32-inch bass is only available in ocean turquoise, and there are very few examples that show up used for purchase. I don't think these are as desirable as the Musuar, but I would not be surprised if they got re-released alongside them, if they do that, just to keep both the Jarman brothers happy. The Electric 12 is maybe not the most creatively named guitar in the Fender lineage, but it is certainly a standout. This is, like it says on the box, an electric 12-string guitar. Unlike most 12 strings, which are just a 6-string design but doubled, the Electric 12 was designed by Leo himself from the ground up to be the ultimate Electric 12, and it actually does this really well, the weird hockey stick headstock notwithstanding. The bridge has saddles for each string, and the split coil pickups capture the 12-string sound really well. This was originally not a very popular guitar at all, and it only ran from 1965 to 1969. However, it came back in 2019 as part of the alternate reality series, and even more recently as part of the Squier Paranormal series reissued last year. I feel like it is still obscure enough and was dead for so long that it warrants being further down the iceberg. The Fender Katana is another one that recently got a bit of a revival, albeit we're still waiting for a new Squier version. Doubt it. This is Fender's attempt at a Randy Rhoads, and depending on your taste levels, it succeeds or fails. I personally love it, but I'm not known for my good taste. This is another Gibson scale Fender. The Fender version has 2 humbuckers and a totally not a Floyd tremolo system. There is also a Squier budget version at the same time, with a single bridge humbucker and a Strat style bridge. Squier also had a bass version, which is basically just an angry precision bass. All the original versions ran from 1985 to 1987. Most recently, Fender made a lot of people very angry and a few people very excited by re-releasing the Katana bass as a signature model for Hama Okamoto. Time will tell if the guitar version ever sees the light of day again, maybe as an 8-string multi-scale with an Evertune bridge. The Fender Bullet, not to be confused with the lowest tier Squier line, is another guitar that fell victim to the early 80s. It looks like a telly that got stuck in the taffy pulling machine. These were originally meant to be made in Korea, but after some production issues, were brought to Fullerton where they made 2 versions. The first has a hardtail bridge and 2 leftover Mustang pickups. These were made from 1981 to 1982. The second series takes the stretch telly concept and applies it to the Stratocaster. Everything else is more or less the same. These were pretty cheap guitars back in the day, marketed as student models and meant to replace the Mustang family, but now they sell for around $1,000 or more because they're, quote, made in the USA. The JP90 and the Bullet bass. So the JP90 is another kind of strange one from the early 90s Fender Dark Ages. I'll go ahead and lump the Bullet bass in here as well, as they go hand in hand together into the abyss. The Bullet bass, much like the Bullet guitars, was created to replace the student models as cheap players. There were 2 versions, the B34 with a standard scale and the B30 at, well, a 30-inch scale. Both have similar silhouettes to the Bullet guitar. The Bullets ran for almost a decade to very little acclaim or value in the market. In 1990, Fender replaced them with the JP90, and this was one of the first models made in the Mexico factory. A weird hybrid of a P and a J, this freak features a slightly elongated J-ish body, squared-off bevels, like many Super Strat-style guitars of its era, and both J and P pickups, a baffling pickguard that protects very little of the picking area of the body, and a skinny P-style headstock completes the, honestly, kind of bizarre look. These held on for another 4 years and were discontinued in 1994. The Fender Prodigy. No, it's not just a Super Strat, I promise. Okay, it's a Super Strat, but the body shape is slightly different. It's got a little more offset to it and a bit wider on the horns, almost like a Yamaha Pacifica. The first round had a traditional Strat trim, but the Prodigy 2 used the collar system like the original HM Strat. These are considered pretty rare since they were only made for a couple years from 91 to 93, and they're good quality, but they're not particularly desirable and their prices reflect that. There's also a jazz-based design with active electronics from the same time frame. What's that? Another Super Strat? You know it! The Showmaster is unique enough in the Fender lineup to warrant at least a quick shout-out. It's a carved top with a flame maple finish, although I've seen a few gold top finishes, and this honestly really sick silver with a single humbucker and knob. There's a wide variety of these out there in terms of pickups, bridges, and cosmetics, including custom shop versions and Squier versions. Check out this Hollow Sparkle. I'd love to have this. However, if you find one with a Stratocaster marked headstock, snag it. These are rare early production models and allegedly have bodies made by John Suhr before he left to start his own guitar company. Showmasters are all over the place in price from reasonably cheap to absurd, depending on the rarity. The 66 is not a Strat, okay? It really isn't. This one's here for the sheer, factor, but not quite as bizarre or rare as the last tier. This is a fairly recent issue for Fender, arriving in the alternate reality series in 2019. It features a 6-string style jazz bass body, a big 70s style headstock, and an HSS pickup configuration with the Strat bridge. They were really just throwing everything at the wall. These were short-lived and quickly climbing up in used prices, so if you can find one under $1,000 and you want it, I suggest snagging it up. I debated whether this next bass even needed to be included separately at all. The Zone bass, not to be confused with the Zon bass, is more or less a precision from the early 2000s, but the unique horn and body carvings, active pickups, and the American Deluxe version's unique, for Fender at least, Aesthetics are worth mentioning. The walnut American Deluxe ones don't pop up often, and next time one does, it's mine. These came in 4 and 5 string versions, as well as PJ or humbucker variants. Oh, the Marauder. You will likely never own an original one of these. Although they were produced from 1962 to 1966, a good chunk of them that existed went into the personal collection of a dude named Porky Freeman. The other various prototypes and show models have scattered to the winds, and they never officially went into production. The first version had very weird experimental pickups with tons of pole pieces and buried under the pickguard. It had 4 3-way switches for ultimate tone variety. This was allegedly really difficult to mass produce, so these prototypes were scrapped and given to Porky. The second type had 3 Jag-style exposed pickups and way more switches than anyone possibly needed, and these also never saw the production line. Other than a few custom shop models for very rich people, the Marauder basically did not exist until 2011, when Fender re-released a simplified version in the Modern Player Mexican-made lineup. Probably the most interesting thing about the reissue is the triple bucker pickup. I mean, look at that thing. This version lasted for 2 years and pops up occasionally on reverb for under $1,000, although this is likely to go up over time. Unlike the other Tele bass that is more precision bass than actual Telecaster, this bass is actually Telecaster shaped. So this one was part of the Squier Vintage Modified line and has not been officially released in any other line or format. It was a special release and only ran for 1 year. With 1 pickup and 3 selectable tone circuits, this one's actually pretty rare and sells for several hundred over its original price of $300. The HM bass. The HM bass could be considered a companion release to the HM Strat back in the 80s. While at first glance, sure, it kind of looks like a precision bass with no pickguard and different pickups, the body is slightly different. It's slimmer, with slightly more elongated horns and a flatter bevel all the way around, as well as an access carve on the lower bout. Triple jazz bass pickups, a TBX circuit, and a 9.5-inch radius round it out. So the HM bass was made both in the Hartfield plant in Japan and in the USA. There's also a Squier version with 2 pickups, no switching, and a 12-inch radius. The HM Ultra basses are an upgraded version with nicer finishes, lace sensor pickups, and active electronics. These only ran for about 4 years total and were discontinued in 1993. The Urge bass is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting Fenders, yet it seems like it's unknown to people who don't really hang out on talk bass. Made originally from 1993 to 1999, this is the signature model for Stu Hamm, and is actually Fender's first signature bass that they've ever made. 24 frets and a P-bass reminiscent body with greater upper fret access make this one stand out among other Fenders. Depending on the specific model, they feature different pickup configurations. The original run was USA made, but a Mexico version was offered shortly thereafter. Both of these came in the pretty rare for Fender 32-inch medium scale. The Urge 2 replaced the Urge 1 in 1999 and features a 34-inch scale along with some other changes. The Urge was then brought back in 2007, similar to the Urge 2 with a Hipshot D-tuner available stock. The Urge basses have been absent from the Fender lineup since 2010. The RR8 squeaks in on a technicality. While I said I wasn't covering any Hartfield branded guitars in this list, Fender slapped their own logo on the headstock of this one for some reason, so it counts. I really can't find many examples of these or info on the Fender branded ones specifically, so drop me a comment if you know more. The RR8 features a unique offset body, hardtail bridge, Gibson scale, 12-inch radius, and switches that I honestly can't find much more information about. By all accounts, both the Fender branded and the Hartfield branded RR guitars are incredible quality, although they seem to sell for more than double what they originally did nowadays. Here's one on Reverb available at the time of making this video. The Dimension bass. So if you already know the Dimension bass, you know this version, which is the good version. It's just Fendery enough to pass inspection, but it has some fun twists to shake things up from the usual P&J suspects. These are not exactly unknown basses, and people who own them seem to really enjoy them. They originally came out in the Modern series, but have popped up a time or two since then in the Deluxe and American Deluxe lines. I call them the We Have the Music Man Stingray at Home, but by all accounts this is very much a Fender answer to those humbucker heavy basses from competitors. And it's honestly a great looking bass. I'd buy one of these, especially in a 5-string. These would honestly kill as a Squier version to compete with the Sterling Music Man's. But what brings the Dimension bass down to the lower parts of the iceberg is that there was actually another Dimension bass model long before the Modern series, released in 2003. This one looks suspiciously like the Ibanez SR style of basses and even has a even more suspiciously un-Fender headstock shape. The body and the headstock shape are also very close, if not exact, to the infamous early 2000s Squier MB4 skull bass, which is about the most early 2000s thing I've ever seen, and I remember actually seeing these at the music store when I was a teenager. Hey, real quick before we get to the final tier, if you like this video or my demo videos and you want to support more like them, I'd really appreciate your financial support. Donations help me to pay for my software subscriptions, purchase pedals to demo, and do more regular video content. Check the video description below for a coffee link. Best to you. On with the show. Level 5. What even is this? So you've made it to the bottom. Congratulations. This level is where we have Fender models that shouldn't exist, or technically don't exist at all. Stuff on this level made it here due to some combination of weirdness, rarity, and obscurity. Bust out the pineapples and shag carpets, it's the Fender Swinger. It made no splash when it released in 1969, nice. And was also discontinued in 1969. Also known as the Musiclander or Arrow, this unholy Frankenstein of Fender's leftover parts is one of the rarest Fender models you can actually still buy, if you have quite a few stacks of cash at least. But you probably don't want it, as its rarity is the only reason for its astronomical price. The quality issues due to being made of spare parts during the CBS era and the overall uniqueness of the aesthetics don't really make for a great playing instrument by all accounts. Leave this one for the die-hard Fender collectors, in my opinion. Next we have the Performers. This 80s X-Men looking outcast is sorta rare, really obscure, and super weird by Fender standards. It's a radical departure from other Fenders besides the body shape, with proprietary slanted humbuckers, the Arrow headstock, the TBX control, and the System 1 totally not a Floyd trim. These came in both guitar and bass varieties and ran from 1985 to 1986. Expect to spend northwards of $2,000 to own one, although they are fairly often available. The Bass 5. Nowadays, 5-string basses are pretty common, but back in the 1960s, no one had ever done it. That's right, this is actually the first 5-string bass guitar, and boy did they get almost everything wrong. The overall length is longer than a precision bass by several inches, but it only has 15 frets. Like the Bullet series, the body was stretched out by a taffy machine. These were later chopped up and repurposed into the Swingers, along with spare Mustang and Duosonic parts, since they didn't sell well at all. Reportedly, there were only a couple hundred units made and sold during its 6-year lifespan because bassists absolutely hated it. Turns out all you need to do is add another string to a J or a P bass to make us happy. Go figure. The Maverick is a cult classic for sure. Also known as the Custom if we go by the headstock, this was another short-lived guitar made in 1969. Nice. Basically a cut-up electric 12 with 6 strings, it keeps the hockey paddle headstock and adds an awkwardly protruding tailbone at the bottom. As it was intended to clear out spare parts post-CBS buyout, this model ended once the supply of leftovers ran out, and there's only a few hundred original ones out there. True to form, Fender released a parallel universe version a couple years back with the Bigsby and Shawbuckers, and honestly I think the green one is pretty slick. I wouldn't buy it, but I respect it. Expect to shell out a couple grand for the reissue or at least $8,000 for an original. The Prophecy bass, not exceedingly rare or expensive, but the Warwick/boutique bass looks are certainly out there for Fender. I mentioned Hartfield at the beginning of this video. Well, they actually produce these basses for Fender in the Fujijin factory. The earlier models are Hartfield branded in bolt-on, while they switched to a Fender logo on the headstock for certain set neck models. The Dakisto only barely qualifies as a Fender electric guitar because it has Fender on the headstock and it has a pickup. But it's certainly cool. This is a collaboration between luthier Jimmy Dakisto, known for his archtops, and Fender. These hollow body archtop guitars had a 24.75-inch scale, like a Gibson, and either 1 or 2 humbuckers, depending on whether you got a standard or an Ultra. Interestingly, the Ultra only has 1 neck pickup. These were produced in the 80s and 90s by Fender Japan, and although they're a bit obscure and off the beaten path for Fender, can still be had in the $2,000 to $4,000 range. They seem to be well-regarded and well-made instruments, so if a jazz box is your thing and you're also a Fender fan, this one might be a no-brainer. The Squier Dearmans. So the story here is that when Fender abandoned the Dearman subsidiary upon acquiring Guild, they still had quite a few models left over. So they slapped the Squier logo on the headstock, named the Series 24, and called it a day. This was a very brief blip in the Fender Squier Guild history in the early 2000s. These are not a common find nowadays, not that they're expensive when they do pop up. The Esprit and Flame are more Fender attempts at stealing some Gibson market share, and honestly for what they are, they seem really nice. Set neck 24.75-inch scale guitars made in the Fujijin plant, what else could you ask for? Definitely better than a modern Gibson, and still cheaper if you find one used. The Esprit is slightly larger and completely symmetrical, while the Flame is smaller and has slightly offset horns. Both feature stop tails with tom-style bridges and dual humbuckers. They came in 3 fit and finish levels, Standard, Elite, and Ultra. If they seem reminiscent of the Yamaha SG, that's because they were allegedly designed by the same dude, Dan Smith. I actually think these are a little cooler than the SG. So the Fender Lead series has seen a revival recently, but one that got left behind is the Lead bass. And to be honest, this bass was never even officially made, hence being at the very bottom of the iceberg. I've only found one grainy photo of one from a magazine advertisement, which means that there were at least some prototypes out there somewhere at some point. Maybe someday Fender or Squier will make an attempt. The Kubicki Factor Bass. Okay, so here's another one that sneaks in on a technicality, but it's one of the most bizarre ones on here. The Kubicki Factor Bass was licensed and produced by Fender. The story goes, Philip Kubicki worked for Fender and was responsible for the creation of several designs during the 60s and 70s, including the Thin Line Telly, the All Rosewood George Harrison Telly, and the LTD and Montego guitars. He struck out on his own and eventually came to designing the Factor Bass. This thing is unbelievably ahead of its time now, much less in the 80s when it debuted. I mean, honestly, it looks like a Music Man Kaizen of bass guitars, and it predates the headless designs that are so popular now. It was actually pretty popular back then, thanks to several big players embracing them on stage, and demand skyrocketed. Kubicki could not keep up with his orders, and so his old employer Fender stepped in to license the bass and produced it in its USA factory. Fender produced the Factors for 2 years, from 1990 to 1992, stamping their seal on the back of the headstocks. Allegedly, the Fender ones are pretty good quality, but the real, quote-unquote, Kubicki basses are much more desirable. Mr. Kubicki sadly passed in 2013, but his legacy lives on, and you can apparently purchase a custom X Factor directly from the website today, if you have about $5,000. For our penultimate guitar, we have the Sergio Vallon signature model. Not exceedingly rare or expensive, but it is certainly unique and obscure model in the Fender line. I'm a big gearhead, and someone had to tell me about this one while I was making this list, and he only knew about it because one popped up locally. Not content to just take a signature Strat like everyone else, Sergio got the whole kit and caboodle done almost from the ground up. It somewhat resembles a Strat, but with an offset body shape and wider horns. The bridge looks like a Strat bridge, but stuck to an offset body style plate. Pickup selector on a rotary switch and a push-pull volume knob that bypasses the pots round out this slightly out there one-off model. To finish off our Iceberg list, we have another archtop jazz box made by Fender. The Montego and Limited are more archtops, very similar to the Diaquisto, but predating the Fender-made version of that by almost a decade. The Montego was the more affordable version with a pressed spruce top and chrome hardware. The Limited, or LTD, was the deluxe version with carved spruce and gold hardware. Both came in single or double pickup versions. There are only about 40 LTDs and 100 Montegos out there in the wild, and they are highly regarded collector's items. And while we're at the bottom of the iceberg, I want to shout out a really cool and exceedingly rare Fender finish that I found during my research. That's the Ghost Telly. These psychedelic buttes were made in 1967, the summer of love, and they feature a blacklight reactive pattern all over the body, fretboard, and headstock. There's allegedly only 2 Tellys and 1 Ghost bass. So let me know, what did I miss? What other videos might you be interested in? I'd love to hear your input as I work on growing this channel and doing more informative, long-form videos such as this one. Give me a sub if you want to see more in the future, and thanks for watching.